Hello and welcome back to the deep dive. Get ready for another mind-expanding journey through the groundbreaking concepts in Dr. Alok Aggarwal's book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution and 100 Years of AI, where the future of technology comes into focus. Last time we were looking at some pretty cool alternatives to how we do computing and storage.
Yeah.
Like using special purpose hardware, for training AI.
Yeah.
And even more specialized hardware for making AI predictions.
It really makes you think about how much things are changing with AI becoming such a big deal.
Totally. But today we're going to dive into two things that you wouldn't think go together. At first, anyway. The world's aging population.
Okay.
And then the jobs that might disappear or appear by 2050 because of AI, robots, and all that automation stuff.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because on the surface, they seem totally separate. But when you understand both of them together, you get a much clearer picture of what the future might look like.
I like it. So first, let's just talk about the thing everyone's worried about, right? Robots taking our jobs. Is it going to happen?
It's a reasonable worry. Back in 2013, Frey and Osborne wrote this paper, and it said that almost half of all jobs in the US were at high risk of being automated. And that was supposed to happen within a decade or two.
Really? Within 10, 20 years?
Yeah, and we're talking about millions of jobs just in the US.
Wow. I can see why people are freaking out.
For sure. And this fear is one reason why people are talking about universal basic income, UBI, as a way to deal with maybe having a lot of people out of work.
Right, UBI. That's where everyone gets money from the government, no matter if they have a job or not, right? Wasn't that something Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg were talking about?
Exactly. The idea's been around forever, but it's getting more attention lately. People like Musk and Zuckerberg say with all this automation, we might need UBI.
Okay, but is it really going to happen? Am I going to get a check in the mail anytime soon?
Probably not right away. Some countries have tried it out, like Finland, Canada, and Switzerland, but they stopped the experiments mostly. It's complicated, It affects the economy, society. It's not just a simple fix.
So does that mean robots are not taking our jobs after all? What's the deal?
Well, there's something else happening that people don't talk about as much, but it's really important too. The world's population is getting older, and it's growing more slowly. And that changes everything when we think about the future of work.
So fewer babies, more grandparents? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's a simple way to put it. The UN, they predict that by 2050, there'll be 9.7 billion people on Earth, and 1.5 billion of those will be 65 or older. But the global workforce, it'll only be 3.9 billion.
Wait a minute. So there are going to be way more people who need care than people working to support them.
You got it. That's the thing. So you have to ask, what does that mean for our societies? How's it going to work?
It sounds like we're in trouble. Why is this happening, though? What are the big reasons?
A few things. First, fewer babies are being born. To keep a population stable, you need a total fertility rate, or TFR, of at least 2.1. That means, on average, each woman has 2.1 kids.
Got it.
But a lot of countries are below that now.
Like which ones?
Well, Japan's a good example. Their TFR has been under 2.1 since the 1960s, and their population's been shrinking for over 10 years already. China's expected to start shrinking too. And even India.
India? But I thought they had tons of people.
They do, but even their TFR went below 2.0 in 2020.
Wow. So this isn't just a problem for a few places, it's happening everywhere. But you said people are also living longer.
Right? That's the second big thing. People are living longer. Globally, in 2019, life expectancy was 72.6 years, and it's expected to go up to 77.1 by 2050.
Okay.
Plus, by 2050, the number of people over 80 will more than triple, from 143 million to 426 million.
So fewer babies, more people over 80. What does that actually mean for us?
Well, it means fewer people entering the workforce and more people who need help and care as they get older. And that's going to change how we think about work. To really understand it, we need to look at something called the support ratio.
Okay, break that down for me. Support ratio. What is that and why is it important here?
Sure. So the support ratio is basically how many working age people there are for every person 65 or older. How many workers are there to support each retiree? The World Health Organization, they say 2.0 is the minimum to keep things running smoothly.
Okay.
But the global support ratio was 4.4 in 2019, but it's expected to drop to 2.6 by 2050.
Hold on. So instead of having 4 workers for every retiree, we're going to have less than 3.
Yeah, and it's even worse for some countries. 48 countries, most of them wealthy, in Europe, North America, and East Asia, are expected to be below 2.0 by 2050. That means less than 2 workers for every person over 65.
That's a big difference. What's going to happen if the ratio gets that low, especially in rich countries?
It's a big question. It's going to put a lot of pressure on things like social safety nets, pensions, and healthcare. And it makes us think about how we organize our societies and economies with such a huge change happening.
It's a lot to take in. It sounds like we need to really rethink work, retirement, and how we care for each other in this century, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that brings us to healthcare. That's an area where we're going to see a massive increase in demand.
Okay, so we've got robots and jobs, aging populations, fewer workers, and now we add healthcare into the mix.
Right? More older people living longer and needing more healthcare. And it's not just about having enough doctors and nurses, it's about the whole system.
So what are the challenges and opportunities in healthcare with all these changes? And where do technology, AI, and automation fit into this?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. It really changes how we think about this whole idea of robots taking our jobs.
It does.
It's not that simple. Automation will probably change some jobs for sure. But the need for healthcare workers, that's huge and growing. And technology can't do it all.
So you're saying there are going to be more jobs in healthcare, even with AI and all that?
Oh, way more than just more. It's going to be massive. Like we might need to train 75 million more healthcare workers globally by 2050 just to keep up.
75 million. That's a hard number to even imagine. It makes all that AI stuff seem less scary, almost.
It shows you why it's so important to look at the whole picture. Not just one trend by itself.
So if we need all these healthcare workers, what kind of jobs are we talking about?
It's really diverse, actually. More doctors, more nurses, obviously, but also a lot more allied health professionals. They're the ones who provide essential services, working alongside doctors and nurses.
Who are they exactly? Can you give some examples?
Think about physical therapists, the ones who help people get moving again. Occupational therapists. They help people with disabilities, like adapt to daily life. Speech-language pathologists, they deal with communication problems. Respiratory therapists, they help people breathe better. There are so many.
So it's like building a team around each patient, right? To meet all their needs.
That's exactly it. And with older folks especially, who often have multiple health issues, this team-based approach is really important.
I see. It's not just about having more doctors, it's about having a whole support network.
Right? And let's not forget home health aides and personal care aides.
Oh, right.
Because more people want to age in place. That means staying home instead of going to a nursing home or something. So the demand for those caregivers is going to be huge.
So we're not just talking about hospitals and clinics. It's about bringing healthcare into people's homes too. What are the challenges with that? How do we make sure people get good care outside of a hospital?
That's a key question. Home-based care is great, right? People are more comfortable at home. It improves their quality of life. But it also means we need to think differently about how we train those home health aides. They often work alone without someone looking over their shoulder all the time.
So they need to be adaptable, able to handle different situations on their own.
Right? Exactly. And this is where technology can help. There are already things like telehealth platforms, so patients can talk to doctors online.
Right?
And wearable devices that track things like heart rate, blood pressure, all that, and can alert caregivers if something's wrong.
So technology can basically extend the reach of healthcare right into people's living rooms.
That's the idea. And it can also take care of some of the more routine tasks, so healthcare workers can focus on the things that really need a human touch. Imagine, machines that make sure patients take their meds correctly, or smart homes that can detect falls and call for help.
That's amazing. So we're not replacing humans. We're using tech to help them do their jobs better.
Exactly. It's about finding the balance between technology and human care. But even with tech, we still need more healthcare workers. And some countries just won't have enough people to fill those jobs, even with all the advancements.
So what happens then? What if a country just doesn't have enough people to take care of its aging population?
That's the big question. And it's a tough one. One solution could be immigration. Countries that are really short on workers, especially in healthcare, might need to rely on people coming in from other countries to fill those gaps.
So basically a flow of workers from countries with younger populations to countries with older populations.
It's possible, but it raises other questions. What about the countries losing those skilled workers? Is it ethical? It's complicated.
It sounds like this is a global issue, not just something each country can solve on its own.
Absolutely. It's going to require countries to work together and come up with some creative solutions. We need policies that encourage people to train for these jobs. We need more research into elder care technology, and maybe we even need to rethink how our societies are structured, Make it easier for different generations to live together and support each other.
It's almost overwhelming to think about all the things that need to change.
It is.
And one of the things that really struck me was how much attention this 2013 study got, the one by Frey and Osborne, about jobs being lost to automation.
Oh yeah, that one definitely made a splash.
What was it about it that really captured everyone's attention like that?
Well, I think a big part of it was just the sheer scope of their analysis. They basically created this whole mathematical model to break down over 700 different occupations in the US.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty ambitious.
Definitely not a small undertaking.
Right? And then on top of that, their conclusion was pretty startling too. They estimated that almost half of all US jobs were at high risk of being automated.
47% to be exact. It was something like 75 million jobs.
Yeah. And they said this could all happen within like a decade or two.
So basically by now.
Right? And, obviously things haven't quite panned out that way.
Yeah, we're actually pretty close to full employment in the US. Not exactly the mass unemployment scenario that everyone was predicting.
Right, so it's what happened? Why hasn't this dramatic shift in the job market really materialized the way they predicted?
Well, the book's author dives into that a bit, doesn't he? What are some of the reasons he gives for why this whole robot takeover might be moving a little slower than expected?
Yeah, he does. He makes a few really interesting points. One of the big ones is that we tend to underestimate just how long it takes for these big technological changes to really take hold. Look back at previous industrial revolutions. Those took decades to really reshape society, not just a few years.
Yeah, that's true.
So his argument is that AI is probably going to follow a similar pattern. It's not going to be this overnight transformation.
It's easy to get caught up in the hype, though, right? Especially with something as potentially groundbreaking as AI. But history shows us that progress usually takes longer than we think it will.
Exactly. And there's another practical hurdle that the author points out too, which is infrastructure. To really unlock the power of AI, we need these really robust systems for collecting, cleaning, and managing data. And building that kind of infrastructure is a massive undertaking.
Yeah, it's not just about flipping a switch and suddenly every company is powered by AI. There are huge logistical challenges involved in implementing these systems on a large scale.
For sure. And even if we did have all the data perfectly organized and accessible, there are still significant limitations with AI itself. The author lists a few, like brittleness, for example.
Okay, so what does that mean for AI to be brittle?
Well, imagine a self-driving car that's never encountered snow before. It might work perfectly fine in sunny weather, but throw in some unexpected snow and the whole system could break down.
I see.
So that's kind of what's meant by brittleness. AI systems can really struggle when they run into situations that are outside the specific data they were trained on.
So even with all the advances we've made in AI, it's still not as adaptable or flexible as human intelligence. Can't always handle those curveballs that real life throws at us.
Exactly. And that lack of adaptability leads to other issues too, like difficulty with uncertainty and a lack of contextual awareness. AI can have trouble understanding the nuances of a situation and making judgments based on a broader context. And then there's the issue of explainability.
Explainability?
Okay, so let's say an AI system makes a decision in your field of work, but you have no way of understanding why it made that decision. The AI can't explain its reasoning process in a way that humans can grasp.
Oh, it's a good point.
So how much trust would you have in that decision?
Not much, honestly. It's hard to fully trust or rely on something if you don't understand the logic behind its decisions, especially when it comes to important stuff.
Exactly. And if you can't trust the technology, then widespread adoption and that job displacement that was predicted becomes a lot less likely.
That makes sense. And then there's the security concerns too, right?
Yeah,
AI systems can be vulnerable to hacking and manipulation, which adds another layer of risk to the whole thing.
absolutely. That's definitely something that often gets overlooked when people make these big predictions about AI taking over. We tend to focus on the potential benefits, but it's important to consider the potential risks too.
So we've got these infrastructure issues, limitations with AI itself, and security risks. Are those the main reasons why the author thinks those 2013 predictions might be off?
Those are definitely major factors. But he also brings up this really interesting comparison: outsourcing.
Outsourcing.
Yeah, he basically argues that if cutting labor costs was the main reason behind jobs disappearing, then wouldn't we have seen a lot more jobs go overseas already?
I don't know if I follow.
Think about it. Companies have been outsourcing certain types of work for decades, right? Manufacturing jobs started moving to lower wage countries back in the late 70s, and then service jobs followed in the 90s. So we've got decades of outsourcing happening. But if it was really just about finding the cheapest labor, wouldn't those 47% of jobs that Frey and Osborne predicted would be gone have already been outsourced? The fact that that hasn't happened suggests that there's something more complex going on.
That's a really interesting point. So it's not as simple as just robots replacing humans. There are other forces at play that are shaping which jobs stay and which ones go.
Exactly. And to really understand those forces, we need to look more closely at the history of outsourcing and what it can teach us about how AI might impact the job market.
Okay, so let's dive into that.
Sounds good.
So the author uses these manufacturing and service jobs that left the U.S. as a case study, right?
Yeah, he does. And it's fascinating stuff.
We were just talking about how those types of jobs started going overseas decades ago. What does he say about them?
Well, he points out that while there have definitely been job losses in those sectors, they haven't been nearly as dramatic as some people predicted. His analysis shows that by 2016, the U.S. had lost less than 18 million manufacturing jobs and around 12 million service jobs to outsourcing.
So that's about 30 million jobs total, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about a span of almost 40 years, which, if I'm doing the math right, is roughly 20% of the 2016 workforce.
You got it.
So, if cutting costs was really the only thing that companies cared about, and there were no barriers to moving jobs around the world, wouldn't we have seen way more jobs lost to outsourcing, especially with all this talk about AI taking over?
That's the author's point, exactly. It suggests that there's more to the story than just cost cutting. And if those jobs weren't easily outsourced to other countries, it makes you wonder if they're really that easy to automate either.
That's a really good point. So where does that leave us with the future of work? Are we safe from the robots?
Well, it's not quite that simple. I think this whole discussion highlights just how nuanced the relationship between technology and jobs really is. It's not as straightforward as just saying automation equals job losses.
So it's not just a matter of robots coming in and stealing all our jobs?
Not necessarily. There's so many other factors at play. Things like how fast technology is developing, the cost and availability of skilled labor, even government regulations and cultural preferences. All of these things influence which jobs are more susceptible to automation and which ones are likely to stay in human hands.
So it's like we need to think about this in a more holistic way. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about the whole ecosystem around work and how that's evolving.
Exactly. And remember, new technologies also create new jobs. The challenge is trying to anticipate those shifts and preparing the workforce for the jobs of the future. It's about adaptability and lifelong learning.
Totally. Okay, so let's now look at a study from Nadel, Koska, and Quintini. Came out back in 2018. They basically took 32 developed countries, the OECD, and used this technique to analyze how likely jobs are to be automated. And the results were kind of startling, honestly.
Definitely eye-opening. They found that 14% of jobs were highly vulnerable. We're talking a 70% or greater chance those jobs could be done by machines, and then another 32% were, maybe not as vulnerable but still at risk. So think about it. That's almost half of all the jobs in those countries.
Yeah, to put some numbers on that, we're talking 200 million jobs potentially affected. That's a lot of people. Imagine the impact that would have on everyone. But hold on, because then Dr. Aggarwal brings up this other 2018 report from the World Economic Forum, the WEF, and they've got some very different predictions about all this.
Right? It's almost the opposite, really. The WEF actually predicts a net increase in jobs by 2022. They're saying 75 million jobs will be displaced. But get this, 133 million new jobs will be created. So basically, their argument is that sure, technology will disrupt things, but it'll also create just as many, if not more, opportunities.
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Dr. Aggarwal, he's not totally buying those WEF predictions, especially he thinks the timeline's way off. And he gives some pretty solid reasons why.
Yeah. He basically points out that, 2022 has already come and gone, and we haven't exactly seen this massive job displacement that the WEF was predicting. I mean, AI is definitely advancing fast, but it's still pretty early days.
Right? And think about it. Has your job been radically transformed by AI in the last couple of years? Maybe some things have been automated, sure, but the whole thing, probably not, right?
Exactly. So the author's point is that the WEF is kind of overestimating how quickly AI will be able to take over entire complex jobs. He thinks the real impact will be a lot bigger than anyone's predicting, but it's also going to take a lot longer to really play out.
Yeah, he's not saying AI won't disrupt the job market, but it's more of a slow burn than a sudden explosion, right? It's kind of like the internet. It took a while for the full impact of that to really hit.
Exactly. It's not an overnight kind of thing. And get this, even though the book is predicting way more job losses to automation by 2050 than those other studies, it's also really emphasizing that a ton of new jobs will be created too. It's kind of like, remember when electricity was invented? Think of all the new jobs that created.
Right? So it's not just about how many jobs are lost or gained, it's about the whole landscape changing. And the kinds of jobs that will be out there are going to be totally different. It's almost like we're stepping into uncharted territory here. So we've got these huge shifts happening, like the aging population and this whole AI revolution. What does that actually mean for us regular people? It changed so much. How do we even prepare for that?
Right? That's the big question everyone's asking. It's not like we can just look into a crystal ball and see exactly what jobs are going to be in demand in 2050.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway is that, the future of work is uncertain. But it's not set in stone either. We actually have a lot of say in how this all unfolds. Do we want a future where AI only benefits a small number of people? Or do we want a future where everyone has the chance to thrive? It's up to us to decide what kind of future we want.
Well said. The decisions we make today, the things we prioritize, the values we hold on to, that's what's going to shape the world of work for future generations. It's a pretty big responsibility when you think about it.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground today. We dove into how an aging population and this AI revolution could reshape the job market, with potentially millions of jobs lost and created by 2050.
Next time, we're looking at how climate change and those booming emerging economies will impact the world of work. Think about it. Efforts to combat climate change could create a ton of new jobs. But if we don't act, there could be major job losses too. And those emerging economies, they're growing so fast. Think of all the opportunities that will create.
So join us next time for another deep dive into these forces that are shaping our world. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep imagining all the possibilities.
See you next time.